We have with us Niraj Rajmohan, who is the founder and CTO, Ultraviolette Automotive, and Akash Deep Tyagi, technical lead, Statiq, and moderating this panel will be Aashutosh Sinha, principal, Nomura Research Institute. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being here.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, WION Drive, for this very interesting event, which talks about the topics of interest for the EV landscape. What I will do today, and we have a very interesting topic at hand, circuit breakers, and we of course have very esteemed panelists who are stalwarts in the startup ecosystem, who are disruptors in this startup ecosystems, I would call that. But before we delve deeper into, and we pick insights from the panelists, what I will like to do is to set a brief agenda, very briefly for 2 to 3 minutes. What topics can we cover? So essentially, the story is that India's EV landscape, EV story has picked up, and that is definitely, there's no second thoughts about it. The penetration, the sales penetration has been, I mean, as we see, as on March 2023, is around 6% for two-wheelers, around 50% for three-wheelers, and then around 2 to 3% for PVs, and 6 to 7% again for buses. So that's something which is a very encouraging thing that we see. Having said that, of course, what we need to also look at, and what I want to bring to light is the global perspective, wherein we see that India is just selling close to around 1 million EVs right now, whereas the global scale is around 10 million electric vehicle cars only. China is leading close to around 60% of that, followed by Europe, and then there's US. Now, of course, that's good signal that the consumers across the globe are accepting the technology. But in the larger scheme of things, how are the Indian startups and the OEMs with the scale at which we are operating currently placed to secure the critical raw materials which will be required for EVs? And why that question becomes critical is because a large part of the value chain is not localized as of now, the battery per se, which is a critical component of the value chain. So how do the Indian OEMs and Indian startups stand against the global OEMs which have massive scale to negotiate with the raw material suppliers? That's one topic that we would want to cater to. Second, another trend that we see is that, and we heard a lot about the range anxiety. So a lot of companies are trying, and rightly so, to increase the range in the batteries. So increasing the range means larger battery packs. That essentially means, of course, more of import dependency. And also, there's a debate whether we need higher batteries with higher ranges, or we need a ubiquitous public charging infrastructure. So how do we balance it out is another question that I would, of course, like to delve deeper on. And third element is the upfront cost, which again was touched upon in the earlier sessions. So there are a lot of innovative business models coming in terms of decoupling the battery and the vehicle, both financially as well as physically. How does that pan out, and how does that look like? So these are the three topics I would want to cover. And of course, I'll start with you, Niraj. I would like to talk about the first point, wherein when we say that in terms of the global landscape and the battery prices that are looking, how do we see the Indian OEM standing or securing the raw materials for the EVs that they plan to manufacture?
I think that's a great question. I think the way that we look at it from Ultraviolette's perspective is that while parts are being procured, if you talk about the things that are not available in India, right? The way I see it is the silicon, in the semiconductor material, the magnets within the motors, or the battery cells, right? Three sort of components. The way we see it is what percentage of the overall value, when you look at it as an EV, is captured locally versus what is, ends up going outside of India. And if you look at the three components that I mentioned, we sort of treat them as commodities, right? We don't treat them as, such a high value product also, right? And that's the good part about it. So from that perspective, we can still say that, majority of the value is still captured in India. And while, the number of components, if you look at the cells or, the semiconductor material, while the number may be higher, we're still looking at them and treating them as commodities from our perspective, right? Okay. In terms of how we see it progressing, right? While, there are several companies setting up manufacturing for cells in India, for semiconductor. I think it's going to be a little bit of, it's going to take a 5-year sort of runway, is the way we see it. And from that perspective of capturing majority of the value, I think the interesting thing that we have done as Ultraviolette is that we have designed, we have developed the vehicle in India, and we have manufactured the vehicle in India. And the way that we sort of look at this overall effect is that we're also going to be sort of exporting the vehicles outside of India, from India. And for us, that net balance, when we import sort of commodities but export high value goods, we sort of see it as that. And for us, that changes the entire perspective completely.
That's an interesting topic that you brought about exporting your vehicles and the range or the power range at which you are targeting, or the kind of segment that you are targeting is somewhere around. I mean, if I do an ICE comparison, it's around 250 to 500 cc bikes, super bikes that we typically have. Of course, the Indian consumers, while that segment I would say it will be a little less price sensitive compared to the other use cases. Having said that, which geographies do you see as decent export potential, and why do you see them as potential, and what do you see that in comparison with Indian market or Indian potential?
See, when we started Ultraviolette about in 2016, right? So the way we saw it was that what would it take to create a sort of entity that caters to global ambitions, right? And when we look at the segments that we are targeting, this is the mid segment of motorcycles, right? That entire, like you said, from 250, 500, 600 cc, right? And if you look at the market potential for that, it's not just, while India is a big part of this market, North America, European market, Southeast Asia, all of these places, there is an aspirational value for motorcycles. And we realized that there were no EVs catering to that particular market. And of course, it's going to be, for us, it's taken us a good 6-7 years to build out the technology to be able to cater to that. But knowing that, there's several millions of vehicles that are needed to be shipped in an EV form, I think we went after that, and that's where we are today, being able to cater to all of these. Of course, for us, what we've seen over the last 2 years since we, unveiled the first vehicles is that the demand has come in from 190 different countries, right? So we see organic demand in terms of registrations on our website, things like that. Of course, being able to deliver vehicles in 190 countries is not an easy task, and frankly, we won't be able to do that immediately. But at least the key geographies, North America, Europe, and certain Southeast Asian countries, I think we are gearing up to start deliveries there.
That's quite an interesting take. I'll come back to you, Niraj. Well, Akash, the second topic that I touched upon was the higher range versus a ubiquitous public charging, or a much more widespread public charging. Let's say, I mean, we accept that most of the OEMs will start to move towards higher battery packs. How do you see that starting to impact your business viability? Or do you still see that even with larger battery packs and higher ranges, we would still need public charging infrastructure to be much more ubiquitous than what we see today?
So first of all, I want to thank WION for this incredible event. It's a great awareness session for everyone involved. So congratulations, guys. Coming back to your question. So if I talk about the EV charging structure in India, so at Statiq, so we have been at the forefront of this e-mobility segment. Okay, so I have been on the ground personally in 2019. So the condition was quite challenging then because it's a chicken and egg problem. People were saying कि पहले charger लगेगा या गाड़ी लें. So it is similar to that case. So anyways, we won't be able to get an answer for that question. Both will run parallelly, hand in hand. So at that time, we thought that EV charging structure is a great concern for our country if we want to boom our e-mobility segment. So we thought that we should be the first one to make the in-house technology in charging infrastructure. So at Statiq, so that is our USP. We are not dependent on any outsourced technology for EV charging. So we have our own in-house design team who design chargers. We have our own software solutions, mobile app, dashboard services. So we provide an end-to-end solution. So that's why we are a cost-effective, robust solution for the Indian market. So that is one important point if we want to tackle the e-mobility segment. The range anxiety, as you mentioned. So if I talk about the present market, so Tata has the majority share in the EV segment, 80% Tata Nexon. So the battery size is approximately 35 units, 200 kilometers of range. And there are very few chargers, like back in 2020, there were very few chargers on the highways. So there was less scope for public charging. So Statiq thought that we should, first of all, connect the major highways of our country. So we thought we should connect all the major highways from Delhi, Delhi Jaipur, Delhi Chandigarh, Delhi Lucknow. So we have installed strategic locations for the EV chargers where user can charge their vehicles and also do like leisure time during that charging. Because for a 200-kilometer range, you obviously need to have one stop for intercity travel. So that was one concern that we are solving. We have multiple public charging stations across pan-India. We have 7,000 stations in India and 1,500 fast charging stations. And that number is going up because the EV sales in our country, year on year, it is approximately 200% in every segment, two-wheeler, three-wheeler, or four-wheeler. So that's a great sign. I am very optimistic. And if the battery size is going to increase, so that is a good initiative, good for the EV users. But it won't affect the public charging infrastructure. We have to install as many chargers as possible. Because personally, I have been to Europe and China to understand what is the e-mobility infrastructure there. So my learnings were, like if I talk about China, so there are multiple public hubs in a radius of 2 kilometers. Like at least one hub will be there for public charging. In India currently, we are setting up hubs for fleet vehicles. But going forward, we have to do that for public as well. So that is one solution. And in China, if I do the comparison, so if I talk about fast charging, because most people rely on fast charging, कि कितनी जल्दी charge होती है, that is the users want. So if I talk about fast charging, so China, the standardized DC charger product is 120 kilowatt in China. But personally, I think in India, it would be a 60 kilowatt charger that would be more standardized because of the infrastructural challenges that we currently have. And I know government is aiming to increase the infrastructural capabilities in our country. We have multiple policies. Every state has come up with their EV policies defining the HT/LT limits for the installation. So that is a good sign. But I am very optimistic. E-mobility is not a new in this world. It is already an established technology. Electric vehicles is a safe technology. So in India, it will be a good success. And we, private players and government, have to mutually collaborate, come up with policies, and that will be a big win for our country.
Absolutely. I think one very interesting and good point that you brought about was selecting or putting up your charging infrastructure across the national highways. A little bit, in terms of from a business viability point of view, I would say that a better utilization would typically be in a captive fleet area where you would be serving for a particular fleet with a fixed run. So your thoughts on why, what were your thoughts when you were deploying charging infrastructure on strategic highways? What was the rationale behind that? I just wanted to understand that. Very interesting move, and that is why I'm trying to understand that.
If I want to talk about the user perspective, a business part is secondary. First, you have to install the charger, and then you have to look for the profit and all. But if we won't install the charger, it will not be beneficial for the users, because ultimately this industry will be driven by the EV vehicles that is on the ground. But if you are not able to support the users while charging, so that is not a great start. So we thought from a user perspective that we should find strategic locations at the highways, in the cities as well, So in Gurgaon only, we have installed 50 to 60 fast chargers. So if I talk about an EV user in Gurgaon, so they won't have any question in mind कि हम charge कहाँ करें. There are multiple options in the NCR area. So gradually that will be the like strategy going forward. First we have to target tier 1 cities and then tier 2, tier 3 cities, because in India a lot of population is based out of tier 2, tier 3. So going forward that should also be our target to install EV chargers.
Fair point. Thank you for that. Coming to you, Niraj, again, and touching upon a very important point, which is the high upfront cost. We all know from a TCO point of view, EVs are attractive. That's a proven fact. Having said that, the segment that you're trying to play in would not be too sensitive on the upfront cost. Still, I would say, I mean, pricing, I mean, if you're just looking at the pricing, it is close to around ₹1 lakh higher than the incumbent leaders in the segment. Are you banking on the early adopters to lap up this product of yours? And B, if you are, then what is the differentiation, or what is your pitch to these consumers? Why should they try an EV versus an ICE, which is any which way a high-performing vehicle for that segment?
Right. So this is a super important question, right? This is something that we've been trying to answer for ourselves and for the market in general, right? I think the first thing which is hard to sort of directly answer is, why are you comparing two different technologies, right? Which frankly people will do because they're switching from an IC engine to an EV, or they're considering that switch. But generally, when you're talking about two very different technologies, both of which, you know, their cost structures are drastically different, right? One is something like a technology that has matured over several decades, and something else that is emerging and which the economies of scale are yet to kick in, right? So, but then no consumer is really interested to hear this part of the story. But we know internally that we have to deal with it, right? So the way to bridge the gap is the way that we see it is, one, from a TCO point of view, of course, fleet vehicles, it starts to make sense. The other part of it is the desirability aspect. What would make a consumer want to say that, listen, I don't mind this premium, a little bit of a premium, and I will still switch to an EV, not because it is an EV, but because it looks like a better option overall, right? In terms of performance, in terms of usability, in terms of connectivity, in terms of smart tech, right? So all of these other things need to add up and make it a more compelling option for a consumer to switch. It can't be upfront, just pay more because you'll save over 5 years or 6 years. And that is why we chose a particular segment, which is motorcycles, where there is a certain level of excitement. It's easy to say that there's a higher willingness to pay, but why is there a higher willingness to pay? It is for that thrill, for that sheer level of excitement, and that is what we want to solve for. And frankly, from a consumer vehicle point of view, if it's not a fleet, that starts to matter more. Right? So, and that's what we're really solving for.
That's very interesting take. Thank you for that, Niraj. Staying on the same topic of upfront cost, but from a charging point of view, as we talked about, basically there are a lot of startups coming in, a lot of business models, innovative business models, which are coming up, which is essentially decoupling the battery and the vehicle to reduce the upfront cost, be it financially or physically. Financially is basically you have a pay-as-you-go model or any other of that, or physically is the swapping model that we see. How as a charging player and as a charging infrastructure player or incumbent, how do you see the fixed charging versus the swapping versus, let's say, the rentals or any other business models? Do you see them coexist? Do you see any segments being taken up by one particular kind of technology? What do you see that split as in future?
Okay, so personally, in my opinion, for the battery swapping, I am not a big fan of battery swapping for four-wheelers. I think there are logistical issues and design issues in that because four-wheeler is a big, like the size of the vehicle is quite big. The battery is placed in such a way that it is not easy to access. So we have to design that EV in such a way that the accessibility of the battery is quite like easy to access. So that is one logistical issue, I think, going forward. Like they will coexist, but I don't think they would be at a much greater scale. If I compare to fixed charging, So that is a more robust and reliable solution for us. Personally, I believe the public charging ecosystem is more viable than battery swapping. But if I talk about two-wheeler industry, in that I think battery swap is viable, and people are already like using battery swap in Delhi NCR, in Bangalore, in Hyderabad as well. So for two-wheeler, I am quite optimistic, but for a four-wheeler point of view, I am a bit concerned on battery swapping.
Yeah, also because there will be a lot of investment or capex from a robotic arm and other aspects at a station level. Fair enough, point taken. Coming back to you, Niraj, again, and I think that's probably I'll just take it as the last question answer from you. You talked about that most of the critical components, you treat them as commodities as of now, because. But having said that, and going forward, we all know that cell level localization is something which is still some time away for India. Of course, the government is pushing with a lot of PLI for ACCs, and there's a lot of push at state and central levels to incentivize localization of the value chain. Going forward, from there to probably a state of stabilization, how do you see balancing it out in terms of the volumes and the import dependency for critical components, especially, and also in terms of the geopolitical situation for rare earth materials which are there? How do you see that managing in the next 3, 4, 5 years when the production or the cell level thing is localized in India?
Sure. So I think the way that we have been, if you have to take each specific component, right? When you talk about microcontrollers or microprocessors, you look at fab facilities, right? They're not just in China, they're in Korea, they're in Thailand, right? So our choices when we make a battery management system or a vehicle control unit or a motor controller, our choices are dictated by the geography in which the chip is manufactured. It's a lot of additional work to do that, right? But we have to do that, and we've been doing that for a couple of years now, right? So asking the vendor, where is the production facility where this is coming from? The same applies to, the cells, right? It's not just only one country where cells are manufactured. Frankly, you have companies in Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, elsewhere, right? So there is a ability to de-risk more on the cells than on the semiconductor, because semiconductor, if you take a particular architecture or platform, you're writing your code, all of your device abstraction layers, you're writing it for a particular type of, microprocessor or microcontroller. But for cells, we have built a different strategy, which is that our battery management system should be able to treat a cell from different vendors in a manner which is, it abstracts it away, and for the end consumer or owner of the vehicle, they don't really know which cell is operating inside, as long as, the performance is up to the mark. So that's how we deal with it, right? And third is the rare earth magnets, which go into, of course it goes into multiple parts, but, generally, especially we're talking about the magnets within the motors. And here the strategy again is, are there other materials available which can make it possible, right? So certain companies have switched to AC induction motors, magnetless designs, right? There are in fact actually other materials which are more readily available in other parts of the world, which can be turned into magnets. You don't need your, neodymium based magnets entirely. There are other materials that are more commonly available. So over time, I think that everyone is planning to de-risk themselves based on, the source of the materials, and there are different ways to approach it from a material sourcing standpoint. On the other side, right, where is the value that we as a company are building? That is on the technology. So if you say the same battery pack, is it possible to get 10 kilometers more range, 50 kilometers more range from the same battery pack? What would that take? That takes improvements in efficiency on the drivetrain, on the aerodynamics. So those are things that we actually have more control on, and that's what we play with, right? So we reduce our dependence on external, geographic constraints that way.
Great. I think that was very insightful. Of course, we're running out of time, but we definitely, at least I can say for myself, I definitely walk out much richer in terms of insights through this discussion, and I'm sure the audience must be feeling the same. Thank you very much for your time, and I hope the audience had a great time.
Thank you.